Hello, this is Paul from Play Magazine, and this is the second part in our video series looking at the history of Deus Ex. Now, in the last video, we looked at the first game, the original Deus Ex, and this time we're looking at Deus Ex Invisible War, which came out in 2003 in the US, 2004 over here. Unlike the first Deus Ex game, this one didn't make it to PlayStation. It is set 20 years after the first Deus Ex. You don't play as JC Denton in this one, who was the protagonist of the first games, but his actions from that game set the context for this one. So basically, after what happened in the first game, there's been a period of war and economic problems, which is called the Collapse. You play as Alex. You can pick a male or female version of Alex, and she or he is biomodified, same as JC Denton in the first game. So she can get all these special abilities, and she's a trainee in a facility called Tarsus, which gets attacked at the beginning of the game. To cut a long story short, there's various competing factions who want Alex to ally with them and work with them so that they can gain control of the world. Now, you'll hear a lot of different things regarding the quality of Deus Ex Invisible War. It's kind of got a reputation for being a rubbish version of Deus Ex, which, if you look back at how it was received at the time, there were quite a lot of people who thought it was a good game, and there are people now who will say that it doesn't deserve that reputation. So I think the first thing that's interesting to talk about is, why is it that it's gained this reputation? Does it deserve it? So I think what that really stemmed from is there was a sense that Invisible War simplifies or streamlines Deus Ex in a way that was problematic. So in the first game, you had, as well as the biomodifications that you could install to give you different abilities, you had a whole list of skills that you could choose from and upgrade. So lockpicking, hacking, and so on and so forth, and that would change the way that you could play the game. You can still achieve objectives in different ways in Invisible War, and there are a lot of different ways different skills that you can use to do that, but you don't have the same level of options as you did in Deus Ex. So you don't have a list of skills, as I said, lockpicking, hacking, and so forth. There's not skills to choose from and upgrade in that way. You have the biomodifications, but there are less options. It's kind of a simplified thing of you have one choice or another on how to upgrade them. So that was one aspect of it. You had only one type of ammo in this game, as opposed to needing different types of ammos. So rightly or wrongly, people felt that it had scaled back on the RPG elements, which I think is a fair point. Whether or not that's a bad thing or not is up to you. But given how important choice is to Deus Ex, why that was such an important factor of what made it such a great game, I think it is slightly problematic. And going and playing this game for the first time, I didn't feel like I had as much choice in the way that I customised and built my playstyle. So I think that's a fair criticism. One of the problems going back and trying to evaluate the legacy of this game, going back to Deus Ex, that's the game that I knew and loved, played it back in the day. So I had a kind of nostalgia for it, which may have helped to make me overlook some of its weaknesses. This is the first time I've played Invisible War, so I don't have that nostalgia, and that might perhaps mean that the game suffers a bit because of that. But anyway, my thoughts on playing it for the first time. Get out of the way straight away, the HUD is horrible and I hate it. It really gets in the way. Really don't like that, but that's a relatively minor thing. One thing I noticed is how quickly it tries to bring in all the conspiracy elements. In the first Deus Ex, you gradually come to realise that things aren't what they seem, and you start to get introduced to these competing factions. Invisible War almost tries to bring you to that stage too quickly, like almost straight away. It's like, right, there's all these different factions and you can choose them, who to work with, and it doesn't really introduce them or build them up. It just feels very rushed, and as if it's trying to go, look, we've got all the conspiracy and faction stuff from the first game. It's kind of a bit jarring. Also, the size of the levels, they feel a lot smaller than they do in the original Deus Ex. So they feel more like a kind of series of interconnected hubs rather than like big sprawling levels that you would get in Deus Ex. And for me, the quality of the level design is not not up to what it is in Deus Ex. I'm not saying it's bad by any stretch of the imagination, and it does still have that thing of you can go different routes and you can achieve your objectives in different ways, and really that was the important thing about Deus Ex. But I think it would be fair to say that level design is not as strong. That's my experience in playing it for the first time anyway. One area where you could argue it's better than the original Deus Ex is in a shooter. When I talked about the original game in the last video, that was one of the things I pointed out, is that while you can claim that Deus Ex let you play in different ways and choose your own play style, which is true to an extent, the fact that the combat, the shooting is so bad, it really does push you to play it as a stealth game. It is a better shooter, Invisible War, I would argue. I would still say that it's better as a stealth game. I mean, that's how I tend to prefer to play those type of games anyway, but it's by no means a good shooter, even if it is an improvement on the first Deus Ex. One thing that interested me on looking back at this game, reading up on it, looking at the legacy of it, how people have evaluated it, it was interesting to see that even Warren Spector himself, who headed up development on the first Deus Ex and this one, has been critical of it himself. He's referred to it as being focus tested and regretting listening to the focus testers. I think that does show in the game. That streamlining that I talked about, that simplification of it, the smaller levels, which I don't know whether that was a result of the focus testing or perhaps a reflection of the fact that this came out on Xbox as well, so maybe it had to be scaled back in order to work on that platform. But in any case, the point is that it does feel like it's lost some of that openness to me. When I was talking about the first game, I was talking about being surprised about how responsive the game could be to what you decided to do, how it would adapt to what happened in really surprising ways. And indeed, one of the common criticisms of this game is that it's too easy to switch between the factions, to have your loyalties swing between them, so it starts to feel like what you're doing doesn't matter. In Deus Ex, you would do something and think, oh, I wonder what this will do, and you'd be surprised at the way the game would respond to that, and for that reason it felt meaningful and it felt significant, perhaps in a way that it doesn't in this one. So I do think it's an inferior version of Deus Ex, and I do think it's lost something, but certainly it's not a bad game, and it does still retain many of the things that made the first game good. It does still have a certain sense of freedom in how you approach your objectives, even if not to the degree of the first game. So reading up on this game and playing it for myself, I've come to kind of think that there's truth to both sides of the argument on Invisible War. It's definitely not a bad game, and I think it can still be very enjoyable and does still retain many of the things that made the original Deus Ex great, but certainly it's made some poor decisions and stripped back on some things, and it suffers a little bit because of that. So that's Deus Ex Invisible War. The next game we're going to be covering in this look back at the Deus Ex series is, of course, Deus Ex Human Revolution, which is a prequel to the first Deus Ex and came out on PlayStation 3 and among other platforms. And it's going to be really interesting to look back at that one, because obviously that came out a long time after the first two in a different context. It's clearly got some influence from modern design sensibilities, so it's going to be interesting to talk about the extent to which that perhaps corrupts what made the original game great, or maybe even improves on them, but we'll get to that in the next video.
The church suffers from certain internal disputes. I can explain more later.